Hi, and welcome back. Well, we've spent the first half of this program looking at the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. Now for the good news. How do we release this block? As we said before, we needed to spend time on what these blocks are, because until you raise it to your awareness, and the second part, until you see the lack of value in it, you're not going to want to change, right? Or if you do want to change, like many on the spiritual path, it's inconsistent. They'll do one thing and another area of their life slips. They'll try at one practice and another part of their life seems to rear up and show them that, in fact, they haven't moved forward, or so it seems. This is the ego at play. And that's why we needed to actually have a really good look at the ego in all its facets. So you've been able to do that. We've seen where it can hide. You yourself have experienced that. Now what we want to do is move on to releasing it. How do we release the ego? How do we develop trust in the universal inspiration instead of the ego? So I'd like to give you this visual, if you'll follow me, as an example, as an analogy of what we mean by transferring trust from the ego to the universal inspiration. So picture in your mind that you're standing behind a chair. It just might be a chair from your dining room, and you're standing behind it, and you've got two hands firmly gripping this chair. Now picture that there's another chair in the room, and this chair is literally just out of your reach. And when I mean just out of your reach, picture yourself now moving away from the chair where you had two hands on, moving away towards the other chair, moving until you've just got one fingertip left on the first chair. And the second chair is now just millimeters out of your reach. And no matter how far you stretch, you just can't reach it. Okay? So have you got that picture in your mind? Great. So let's return back to the first chair where we're standing behind the chair and we've got two hands firmly clasped onto this chair. Now let this chair represent the ego life that we've had up to this point. And the second chair, which is just out of our reach, let that represent the true essence of who we are, the love that we are, the peace that we are, the joy and the abundance that we are. Let that also represent, therefore, your unified self, the truth of who you are. Now the funny thing is that in this life, what we do is that with that first chair, that we'll now name the ego chair, we stand there and we say, "Bring the truth to me." It just doesn't work. We received guidance on the title of our book, "Take Me to Truth," in a loud, booming voice, which is quite funny. But it was very clear, take me to truth, because what needs to happen is that we need to take me, the false illusion of who I think I am, to the truth. We can't bring truth to illusion. And many of us, that's exactly what we do. We stand there behind our ego chair and we say, "Bring me the truth." Or what we do is we perform good acts in the mistaken belief that it will bring again truth to us, bring the peace that we so desperately crave, bring the love that we so desperately crave to us. And it can't happen. And then, as we said before, we get frustrated and angry and believe even more that there is no God, there is no divine, and we really are on our own and isolated. Life seems random, just happens to us, and I'm a victim. Now, So picture yourself at these chairs. You can see clearly that the only way to get to that second chair is to actually let go of the first chair. Let go. Surrender. And then there is a moment where we are in the void, in between the two chairs. This is the place that the ego most fears, because it has to know. It simply has to know. It can't live with I don't know. And that's why we call this journey the journey of the development of trust, because it requires trust to enter a space of I don't know. And then miraculously, what happens is that when we have the courage to enter this space of I don't know and invite the divine to speak to us, to show us, to guide us, what actually happens is that he picks us up and transports us to the safety of ourselves. We don't actually do anything. Our only job is the willingness to let go. That's it. So if you're looking for the sorts of spiritual practice, if you're out there as a seeker and you're still looking at, well, which pathway will I follow, etc. It doesn't matter. All roads lead to Rome, so to speak. But the fastest routes home, whichever practice you choose, will entail a stage, and we will talk about the stages of the development of trust later. But it will include a stage that requires you to let go. So if you're looking at any kind of practice, have a look at that and see if it includes a section where you surrender to the divine. Because as we said before, there are many other practices that'll give you a high, give you a buzz, make you feel good, you'll feel connected, you'll feel at one, only to feel even worse later because you lose that, and it's just a state of enlightenment. It's nothing that holds, that grips, that stays with you. That's actually within you. The ego's a funny character. You can picture it. This is what we do. When we actually do see the path, and by the way, we all have been there. We have all been at the point where it's like the chair is on fire. It's just far too hot. One hand comes off, and then what we do is we're so scared. What we do is we start flipping hands to try and handle the heat. I can take it. I can take it. See, this is the suffering factor. I can handle it. And all we got to do is let go. The peace that we're all craving is just there. That chair, you can see it's just out of your reach. It's not in another country. It's not out of sight. It's not beyond the horizon. It's there, several feet away. But still we try to bargain. Okay, I know I haven't been good. I'll give up smoking. Please fix this situation for me. I'll give up drinking. Please fix this situation. I'll do more good works. Please fix this situation. Notice that all the bargaining is around fixing the situation. In the development of trust, what we actually want to do is recognize that the situation is simply the effect. What we want to do is fix the cause. And the cause is at the level of the mind. And at the level of the mind, the ego is literally insane. So it's never going to be able to fix anything. What we need to do, in fact, is make the journey across to the other chair. Hand over. Allow spirit to now reinterpret. Just offer up that willingness. That's all we got to do. So what the ego wants to do, though, is that it hears this message and it says, okay, I've really had enough of this pain and suffering, and I do want to wake up. I do want to be enlightened. I do want to live in the happy dream. And then instead of simply letting go, it says, can you please explain that to me? Can you tell me how it works? Should I start with the left foot or the right foot? Is it better to begin in the morning or in the afternoon? Okay, I'm ready to go now. No, I was just kidding. I'm ready. 1, 2. I've just got to take care of my finances before I do this. You see, it'll keep throwing up distractions, even to the point of attacking the body. So you may find yourself in a position where you're finally ready to surrender. Bang, you get ill. And then you're tempted to think, uh-oh, something's wrong. See, the ego always wants you to think something is wrong, so that you hold on to the chair and try to fix the issue, rather than heal the mind. That's how it distracts us. All we've got to do, as we said, is have the little willingness for every situation to be reinterpreted, to dare to go into the void, to dare actually to do nothing until you feel within yourself that that action is coming from love, not fear. And Nouk will share an example of that in our life with our daughter Ricky, about the conflict and about how the ego was trying to show us that we should act with fear and the choices that we made. In every scenario, examine your intent. Where is this coming from? If a friend contacts you and says you haven't been around and does the old guilt trip thing on you, your first reaction, what is it? Is it to pick up that phone immediately and say, oh, I'm so sorry and I haven't been here? If it is, ask yourself, what is the intent? Is that really coming because you're genuinely sorry? Or are you scared of losing a special relationship? There are all these areas that we need to look at. The way we respond with our children, our parents, etc. Is it from love, or is it from a conditioning that they or I or ourselves has imposed on each other? In other words, a mutually exclusive, conditional special relationship. To undo the ego is to withdraw specialness. And specialness is like a drug. And there is a detox period in that. I know, because in the healing of the relationship between Nouk and I, as she withdrew specialness, in other words, there were certain things she was doing in the relationship because she wanted to keep my love, because she wanted to earn my approval. And when she woke up and saw, hang on a minute, these actions don't come from love, and she stopped doing that, my ego feared this is the loss of the relationship. This is the demise of the relationship. So it steps in to fix, always. So what did I do? What I did was try to exert control, to put more guilt on her, to try and make her, if you like, jump back in the box, to control her. Those actions aren't from love. Those actions were from fear. And this is what we mean about undoing the ego. So the test for me was actually to let go of that chair, to go into the unknown, which is to say, you know what, it seems scary because it looks like this relationship is in demise. But I've just got to believe that when Nouk says she's not doing it, not because she doesn't love me, but because she wants a more equitable relationship, and because she wants to be authentic to herself, my only job is to accept that. Our only job is to accept what is, not to resist and not to try and fix. Not until we've made the journey anyway, from the chair of the ego over to the chair of spirit, because over there, spirit will guide us about what to do, if anything. Interestingly, usually there's not much to do. A huge part of our undoing comes from giving up our expectations. So I ask you, in your mind, look around the room, look around your life, the people that are in your life, the people you hold dear and love. What expectations have you placed on them? What conditions have you placed on them in return for your love? What expectations have you placed on people in terms of benchmarks of success? For example, your children finishing high school, going on to college, getting a great job. What are the standards there? What are you expecting from your partner in terms of what they do for you? What are you expecting of yourself? How hard do you judge yourself? You see, the harder you judge yourself, what you're going to find is out there is judging you just as hard, if not harder, naturally, because they're a projection of you. The funny thing is because the ego doesn't realize that. It says, geez, I wish the outside world wouldn't judge me so critically. They all give me such a hard time. I have this narrow line that I traverse in my life. The narrow line is because you've imposed that narrow line on yourself and everybody else in your life with your expectations about how you and others should behave or have beliefs, etc. Ask yourself now, what are you scared of losing? Is it your house? Is it your family? Your friends? Your position, your title, your health, hey, even your life. Let's raise this all up, you see, because until it's raised up, these are the things that cause fear. These are the things that then, the fear causes the disease and the illness in our body when we don't raise it up to the light. So what are you scared of losing? I'd like to take a moment and just write that down. What are you scared of losing in this life? The peace that's on the other side, where the other chair is just out of our reach. It is peaceful because we have detached. We're able to be an observer of all that's happening in our life. We're no longer just the participant. We're aware that we're more than our body. We're aware that we're more than our feelings and our emotions. We're also aware that we now have a choice. We don't just have to react. At the ego chair, we're always reacting. Defense, attack, parry. How do I get? How do I have? How do I become? How do I avoid? We've made the transition of trust. What's happening is that we're still totally involved in the world. We're still totally doing all the things that we love. All the same stuff is still happening in front of us. But the difference now is we're not buying in. It's okay. This doesn't mean we're not disappointed, because so long as we're in form and we're in the body, there is an ego. We are going to have expectations and so on. And we are going to feel let down. But the difference is that that sensation lasts for a second or two, because your right-mindedness says, oh yeah, that's not me, that's not how I define myself. Oh yeah, all that's happening is that I thought I was attached to that. I thought I needed that. I don't. And it's gone. Peace is restored. We're going to talk more in the relationship section about this. But also, giving is receiving. You want to undo the ego? Look to give, but give from love. Like we said before, don't give to get. Don't give to try and maintain a special relationship. But try giving when it's the last thing you want to do. And then invite spirit to give with you. So it's not you giving. Because if it's just you giving, It's the ego giving, and then we've entered the realm of sacrifice, which always, and I mean always, demands payment. I'm sure you've experienced that before, where a friend will come over and say to you, hey, I want you to do this, 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 and this for me. And you might say, look, I'm really busy, or I can't, or I'm tired. And your friend will say, remember the times that I did that, and that, and that for you? See, that's the kind of giving that came from sacrifice that's now demanding the payment. This is the special relationship. And here's a huge and difficult one. Difficult in the early parts, as Nouk and I experienced and will share in our story. Don't point out error in others. For many years, Nouk and I thought we were being helpful to each other by bashing each other over the head with A Course in Miracles. And say, you see, you made an error in this way, and you shouldn't be acting like this. And where did that come from? It wasn't until much later I remembered, oh yeah, hang on, there's only one of us in the room. So if I'm bashing her over the head with this, who am I really bashing? And if I see that fault in her, who's got the fault? Oops-a-daisy, it's me. If I'm making a judgment about Nouk being lazy, for example, in a certain area, the real truth is that I don't want to see the laziness that's in me. So don't point out error. And give up the need to be right. It is so liberating. You see, this is part of the development of trust. So picture yourself standing there behind this chair, the ego chair, and somebody says something to you that you believe is absolutely wrong. Not only that, but you can back it up with your own evidence to prove to this person they are wrong and you are right. Now remembering that any kind of victory like that only enhances your sense of isolation and separateness and aloneness. So using the process of the two chairs, what we're going to do is, instead of defending or attacking, because they're both the same, we're going to move over to the chair of spirit and offer no defense. Nothing to come back at this other person with. How liberating would that be, to allow them to be right? You see, the only reason that we need to be right is because we think we're so tiny and small that we have to defend our little fiefdom. Over with spirit, when we don't defend, when we allow it to just wash it over us, we're remembering who we truly are, which is part of the divine. Now ask yourself this question. If you were the part of everything, with the part of everything and love, and if love was everything, in other words, there is no opposite, would that need to defend anything? Would the magnificence of who we truly are need to defend anything? Because it would be like a little kid kicking us in the shins. I mean, what we do in this game of life is that's exactly what's happening. We forget that our partner, or our friend, or our work colleague, or our parent, whoever in our life that's kicking our shin is just a little kid, because for them to attack us is only an act of them forgetting their magnificence. So they kick us in the shin. Now for us to kick them back would be akin to the Almighty kicking a little kid. And you'd say, hey, you're being a bully. Well, that's exactly what we're doing. We're forgetting. And the sad thing is that when we react and forget, then we are lost. You see, so there's only one loser. It's us. So this business of developing trust, in the end, what I'd like to say is that there are many other teachers that are out there that can explain it much better than we can in intellectual terms about what it means to hand over trust. But what we'd like to share with you is that we know from experience what it is. And that what it is that you don't need to know what that other chair looks like, how many steps away it is, what color is it, how do you get there. All you need to do is learn to trust and let go. And at the experiential level, we have experienced that, and we can tell you with all confidence, what is safe. Jump in.
What we're saying here is the ego is an illusion. This mistaken identity that we think is us is an illusion. Who we really are is the divine within. So, if the ego is an illusion, are the doings of the ego an illusion? Well, they are. Of course they are, because the doings are coming from an illusion. To give you an example, if Tomas was to be angry at me, would that anger be an illusion? Of course it would be, because it would be coming from his wrong-minded self, in other words, from the ego. So this is just another way of looking at what we call sin, which is really just a mistake. That's all it is, just an error. There's actually no sin whatsoever. And I think this is so important for us to look at, because there's no sin that occurred in our lifetime that was real. There was nothing that anybody did to us that was real. And there is nothing that we did to anybody else that was real. So there's no guilt. The only way we can have guilt is if there is sin, if we believe there is sin. So a huge part of undoing the ego is to remember quantum forgiveness. In other words, what we do is we remember that what has seemingly hurt us is not real at the true level, and that it's coming from our unconscious guilt. It's a projection coming from our unconscious guilt. A simple example of quantum forgiveness might be this. Say you're a boss and you're having to fire an employee who's been long-standing and seemingly quite trustworthy for many years. But you're being called by your boss to fire this employee because this employee has been found stealing. So it's a bit of a shock. It's quite a shock to you, because not only have you been working with this employee for many years, but you are both friends as well. So imagine that it would be your job to fire this employee who is also a friend. Now, to explain quantum forgiveness here, it would be that at the level of the world, in other words, the level of behaviour, which is the level of effect, not cause, remember cause is our mind, at the level of effect, we're being asked or challenged to have to fire this employee. So there's no way around that. We go and we speak to the employee and we say to the employee, look, I'm sorry, you've done a good job up until now, but one of the main rules that we have to follow in this corporation is no stealing, and you stole, and here's the proof, etc. So you're having to fire that employee at the level of form, here in the world, the level of behaviour, the level of effect. The interesting thing that we need to look at here is what's happening at the level of cause, what's happening at the level of intent. So what's happening in our mind, in our heart, in our emotions, okay? And the key here is to look at the emotional charge that we feel. All of us are challenged every day with decisions that we just have to make decisions that we don't like. We have to do things we don't like. But it is important for us to look at, or to become the observer again, to go to the decision maker in our mind, to choose to look at what the intent is behind what we're doing here, okay? And we will see every time we make a decision, every time we have to do something you don't want to do at the level of form, we need to look at the level of emotional charge that we feel. So in the case of the boss having to fire the employee, he might be feeling, if he was to use radical self-honesty, really observe what was happening within him, he would be undoing a chunk of his own ego if he was to spend the time to do that. So look at the emotional charge we feel. In other words, have a look at the level of blame that we might still have. This boss might be feeling betrayed and angry at that betrayal. Then if he wanted to undo his ego, he'd need to look at that, because that level of emotional charge would signify how much unconscious guilt was left within him. In other words, how much of this act, this seeming act that's outside of him or her, is really coming from his own projected unconscious guilt. And practical examples of undoing the ego, one practical example I'd like to share with you in an area that I personally experienced with the earlier days of our relationship, Tomas and I, when things were pretty rough going, was one that involved seemingly defense and attack. But what I learned early on in the relationship is that whenever Tomas lost control or got angry, which is what normally happens or what often happens in the early parts of relationship when we're transferring it from the conditional special relationship to an unconditional unified or holy relationship, is that our partner or whoever the other person is will usually feel threatened. In other words, what's happening is that whoever is saner at the time, whoever is conscious of undoing the ego, will be removing or withdrawing false love, or what I call ego stroking. And that's what happened with Tomas and I. And as I withdrew this false love or this ego stroking, his ego went on high beam for a while. And so he would find all of the obvious buttons to press on me at that time. And then I was left in this scenario where I needed to call on spirit to reinterpret what was happening for me. In other words, to go straight to observing why I felt attacked. And then at the same time as I was in the present moment observing that, what I would do is look at it or weigh at the level of form, at the level of effect, that I could sort of soften the blow. In other words, to disarm his anger at the time. And so I learned something that was very helpful in our early days, which was that whenever he was angry at me, I would listen and not defend. That's really important, just to listen. And then I would say, well, Tomas, would you like a cup of tea? And that would totally disarm his ego's anger. And it would help me to remember who I am, which is pure innocence. Also, it would mirror to Tomas his absolute guiltlessness. And that's where the miracle comes in. It's in that moment when we're in conflict, especially when we're in conflict with somebody else. It's whoever's saner at the time, whoever has that intent, that willingness to heal. That's the one who's responsible for the quantum forgiveness. Because it's in that moment when we seemingly give forgiveness that what is actually really happening, the transaction that's truly occurring, is sure, we're forgiving the other. But what's really happening is that we're forgiving ourselves and undoing a great chunk of the obstruction to the awareness of love's presence in us and in our lives. So it's well worthwhile to remember whenever anybody else seemingly causes us conflict, that we can offer quantum forgiveness in that moment. Previously in the program, we were talking about how the world is very resistant to breaking down. In other words, the collective ego certainly doesn't want us to break down enough in order to break through. Because if we did break through, then collectively we would wake up, which is what's occurring here in the world today. There are many of us that are on this journey who are wanting to wake up and are really practicing these principles of awakening. So breaking down to break through. every one of us will go through the process. In fact, all of us have initiated the process already. It's just whether we're willing to recognize it and acknowledge it, and then willingly embark upon the undoing journey ourselves. I'd like to share a story of breaking down in order to break through. And this story represents a huge area for me personally where I learned to develop trust. In other words, it was a 2.5 year time span where at the time I didn't realize what was happening. But what was happening was that I was learning to transfer trust in the ego, which is fear, to trusting in the divine, the universal inspiration. My first test was with Tomas in our relationship, and I learned a lot from that. I'll correct that and I'll say I unlearned a lot of the ego. So that was a wonderful unlearning experience. And the second biggest experience for me of unlearning, in other words, of having a huge group of my mistaken identities withdrawn, those mistaken identity stakes in the ground withdrawn, was with my daughter Ricky. Tomas mentioned that Ricky at the age of 14 got quite ill. She developed anorexia and bulimia and was suicidal. And of course, she gave us the most amazing opportunity during that 2.5 year period to unlearn fear. But in order to unlearn fear, we needed to face our worst fears. So I might share some of that story with you. It may help you as well. First, I'll let you know the good news, which is that Ricky is now 21. There's no sign of any of the illness that she previously had. She basically undid a huge chunk of her ego, if not nearly all of her ego. And I can say now most assuredly that she's a much greater teacher than I will ever be in this lifetime. So she's fully healed, she's a joy to be with, she's living a life full of creative expression, much love, and very little fear these days. So she's a beacon of light, not just for us, Tomas and I as her parents, but for all her friends and for others out there too who are associated with her. So it really is a remarkable story that she broke down to the point of very near death and then allowed spirit, not the ego, she allowed spirit to take her through a breakthrough. But in order to actually get to that breakthrough, in her case, she needed to have a breakdown. So what happened was that at 14 years old, she came and said, look, I just can't do another day of school. We already knew that she was bulimic and had anorexia. We were very concerned. She was not at that point yet for us to take her to seek medical attention, but it was getting worse by the week or by the month back in those days. So Ricky really couldn't do a day of school. When I say a breakdown, I mean a breakdown of everything. She couldn't do the school thing, she couldn't do the friends thing, she just couldn't do anything. She just was in a very sad state of affairs, and she was experiencing a very deep depression too at that time, although we weren't really aware of it. Remembering too that I, at that stage, still had a few posts in the ground, mistaken identity posts of what a mother should be, what she should be. And so my identity was threatened, especially in the area of education. I thought, my God, what's going to happen if she doesn't go to school? I mean, I don't even think this is legal. So both Tomas and I were really in a quandary about this, but at the same time we knew that we were in the process of undoing our own egos and that we needed to go to spirit with everything. We needed to go to spirit with the idea of Ricky being ill, with the idea of Ricky saying she can't go back to school. So we did that. We went to spirit and asked about the school, and what we got was not what we expected. the answer from Spirit was no, allow Ricky to stop going to school for now and trust that she is doing the right thing and that she will eventually go back to school when she's ready, whenever that is. Of course, what the ego does is ask the question. Spirit says, well, when will that be? Show me how that will happen. But this was a period of us entering, as Tomas was saying earlier, entering the not knowing period, or the I don't know period, the void. And this is extremely important for us to enter in many aspects of our lives, especially the areas of our lives where we're previously stuck and we don't know it. In other words, the areas that we have the most attachment to. They are the very areas that obstruct love's presence from us. So they're the areas that we need to learn to develop trust in. So of course they'll be challenged. Many of them will be challenged. But remember, you won't lose anything and there's no sacrifice made. I might add here that we didn't know when Ricky would go back to school or even if she would complete school. So we had to let all of our expectations go at that point. What did happen, of course, was 2.5 years later, Ricky did go back to school and she completed 2 years in one perfectly. But that wasn't the objective. I'm just letting you know that because to let you know that it all works out perfectly in the end. Going back to when she was 14 and a half, when she was really sick, Ricky said to us, okay, no school, and I'm going to have to also leave this city. I need to be in another city. So we moved. We went to Spirit on this one as well. So we moved about 1,000 miles away, set up house there, and had the intent for Ricky's healing. But by this stage, of course, Ricky had got sicker and sicker, both physically and emotionally, because the depression had really set in badly. And the guidance that we were getting from our family and friends, in other words, from the level of the world, was that you better rush in and take her to the medical model now so that she can get some healing. Now, coming from fear, and I mean this is very fearful because our daughter at that stage weighed, I guess, about 80, maybe 82 pounds, and she's a good 5'7" or so she was losing weight rapidly. We thought we better take her to the medical model. To cut a long story short, we spent 8 to 14 months taking Ricky to a few different psychologists. And all of these psychologists said that she was getting worse, but they were giving her treatment. And I'm not knocking psychologists here at all. It's just that what was really occurring was not addressed. Ricky was having a breakdown in order to have a breakthrough. She was experiencing a spiritual crisis. In other words, she was undoing the self she thought she was. And what was occurring with the medical model in most cases was that they, through their training, were trying to repair that false self that Ricky was unconsciously breaking down. So we had a conflict of interests occurring, and because of that, Ricky got worse again, until we came to a point where we almost nearly lost Ricky because she just didn't want to really belong to the world anymore. Having all of this treatment wasn't helping her, it was making things worse. They were telling her that she could die and that she needed to be on very powerful doses of antidepressants. And Ricky naturally didn't want to take these drugs, so we were in conflict. At that point, we were told that if Ricky wasn't placed in hospital pretty much by that evening in the psychiatric ward and on very strong drugs, that we may find her dead in the morning. This is awfully scary to anybody, and for us it was quite terrifying. But at the same time we remembered, hey, nothing is ever wrong. Everything that happens in this life happens for a purpose. We had to remember that, and we needed to go to Spirit with this scenario So I knew intuitively that Ricky would not survive a hospital stay, especially with drugs and God knows what else. We already proved that the medical model wasn't working for her. Nobody seemed to really understand that she was going through a breakdown in order to have a breakthrough, a spiritual crisis, and that just the only part of her that was dying was really her false self. So Tomas and I went to Spirit with this, and we really did pray and ask for help, and what we got from it was that we needed to talk with Ricky. We needed to sit with her, hold hands, all three of us, call the divine in, and see Ricky, really see Ricky for who she is. Not the ego, not the body that was withering away and dying, but to see who she really was. And that's the job of any parent. It's just that we often miss these opportunities because we're so fearful of losing our children or our parents or our partners, whoever it might be. In Ricky's case, we needed to have this meeting to see her and to ask her, not to ask her ego, but to ask her spirit, to ask the divine within Ricky. Tell us, sweetheart, what do you need? And that's what we did. And it was this moment where we sat together and we asked her, we said, Ricky, what do you want? She told us, if I go into hospital tonight, that will be the death of me. I will take my life. I'll find a way to take my life. So as parents, we had to go back and go, okay, so the medical model, no, we're not going to put her in hospital. We're listening to the divine within her. Now listen to the divine within us. And what we heard was this. Both of us heard it at the same time, Tomas and I. And so what we heard, we repeated to Ricky. What we said to Ricky at that moment is, sweetheart, we hear you. We hear you fully. We're here to be of service for you. We know that you're completely safe. We know that who you are is whole and complete and never can be threatened. We're not seeing your body. We're not seeing the so-called illness. We're seeing you. We're seeing you fully. However, can we just ask you one thing? We're not going to put you in hospital. We're going to have you at home. But please, sweetheart, could you promise us that you won't take your life? Do you know what she answered? She said, no. I am so sorry. I wish I could. But I would be lying to you if I told you that I won't take my life. Because in the conflicted state that I'm in right now, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just asking you, please don't put me in hospital. So as parents, Tomas and I realised, my God, she's not taking the condition. The condition was that she could stay at home without taking her life. She's not taking the condition. So what is next? So Spirit told us this, just to accept her for where she's at. That's all we're asked to do. Just to accept her with no expectations. So we did. We said, sweetheart, okay, we respect your wishes. This pushed us over the edge. We didn't know what was about to happen, but in that moment what happened was a miracle. Because in that moment it pushed us as parents over the edge, because we found ourselves saying to her this: we love you no matter what. We love you even if you do take your life. We know you're whole. We know you're complete. We know you can never be threatened. We adore you. We will love you beyond eternity. Therefore, we have no expectations of you. Just know that even if you did take your life, there would be no guilt. There would be no shame. None whatsoever. That we would love you no matter what. And that was so sincere in that moment, because we didn't know that we would have the courage to say something like that and to mean it. What we realised later was that it was the divine in us that came through to extend that to Ricky. All that it took was our courage to ask the divine to come through us. Now in that moment, Ricky was seen really, for the first time, at 15 years old, Ricky was seen for the first time by her parents. And a huge miracle occurred in that moment. We didn't realise it, but what happened was that she was given permission to just be who she was. She was seen. She was guiltless. She was absolutely innocent and totally spotless in that moment. There was nothing that she could do that would break the love or end the love that we had for her, not even if she suicided. Now, in that moment, that was it. We didn't know, but that was the moment that she got better. That was the moment she was seen, when we extended that love to her, the love we didn't even think we had. There was spirit within us that extended it to her. That was when she got better. From that moment onwards, in increments, small, albeit, but small increments, she began to get better and better and better and better, until the point where she put on weight, she became hugely healthy, and then she came to us one day and said, I'm going back to school. I'm going back to school, I'm going to do 2 years in one, and I'm going to excel. And she did. And the funny thing about that was that way back in those times where we were taking her to the psychologists, they had her on a very high dose of antidepressants, 5 a day. She was taking 5 pills a day, and being the obsessive control freak of a mother that I was back in those days, I would go into her bedroom and check to see if she'd popped out 5 pills every day. And for 14 months she did. She never missed a pill. Well, that's what I thought. But later, as Ricky got better and we could really talk about the process and really engage in the whole thing, she surprised Tomas and I one day by saying, just sit down, I need to tell you something very funny. You know those antidepressants that I was taking for 14 months, 5 a day? I never took one. Well, I was so shocked. I said, Ricky, you're kidding. How did you get better? How did you get better without the antidepressants? She said, well, I just popped them all down the toilet. And you didn't know the difference. But it was when you told me that you loved me no matter what. There was nothing that I could do, not even suicide, that would end the love that you had for me. That was when I really knew that I was loved. And that was when I decided then that there was no need to be sick anymore. That's huge. No need to be sick anymore. So that leads me to believe that most of the sickness, if not all of the sickness that we have, really comes from this core desire that we want to be seen. We want to be seen as innocent. But in order to actually get to that point, most of us need to give it. We really need to give it. It's when we give it that we realise that we are it, that we have it, and that we've had it all the time. It's in extending that. And it's in asking Spirit to come through us to do the work, because there's really nothing for us to do as an ego, as a separated self. Spirit does all the work.
At the top of this session, we looked at how do we undo the ego. And we mentioned a whole range of ways that we do that, all of which I believe were brought out in the story Nouk just shared with you about our daughter Ricky. We learned about trust in spirit. We learned to see Ricky and to trust that within her. We learned to let go. See, we had to let go of the chair there completely. Even whilst the whole world was telling us this is what we should do, the guidance was to let go, to allow Spirit to interpret or reinterpret it, and to allow the miracle of healing to occur without us doing anything. I'm sure you must be wondering, you keep saying, well, you listen to Spirit. How do you hear Spirit? How do you know it's Spirit and not the voice of ego? See, the ego's funny, right? We've talked about how there are 2 things and only one is real. There's love and then there's fear, and fear isn't real. So of course the ego jumps on that. And it says, right, so that means that whatever choice you make, it's the one without fear that must be the one of spirit. And that's not actually true in many cases. If we look at the scenario with Ricky, the guidance we had was ultimately to join with Ricky in love and to tell her that we loved her no matter what, even if she took her life. That was the guidance. Do you think there wasn't fear after that decision, after that was mentioned? Of course Nouk and I still felt fear, because it wasn't as if miraculously the next day she got up and all was well. The effects of her illness dragged on for another year after that, although yes, she was getting progressively better. But the thing is this, at that very point where we surrendered all expectation, in other words, the expectation that she would live if we did this, and all that bargaining stuff that we are all so familiar with. When we gave up the bargaining, when we surrendered entirely, the sense was that we know it's Spirit's voice, not because of the absence of fear, but because of the strange presence of peace. And I use the word strange presence of peace because, as you see from that scenario, it is strange that at the moment when we say to our daughter, "You are free, whatever you do, we love you, even if you decide to take your life," it would be strange to then experience peace. And that's how we learned that. How do you discern the voice of Spirit? It's not necessarily the absence of fear, but it is the presence of peace. The other thing is this. The other alternative will always increase fear. That's the other thing to look at. So if we look at it practically in our situation, in our particular scenario with Ricky, if we had forced her to take the medical model, and if they had, through their suicide watch, made sure that she didn't kill herself, but then it stripped away her spirit, and she just then led a life of just really being a vegetable, taking these drugs and being so doped up, that would have increased far more fear in us. So we knew also that wasn't the choice. I want to mention something about giving up expectations here that we learned. Have a look at this one, hope versus trust. How often do we mention, without even being conscious, "Oh, I hope this works out. Oh, I hope that for my son or my daughter." Hope and trust are like love and fear. They don't know each other and they can't reside in the same room. Hope is actually the absence of trust. It's actually a randomness. Hope is a prayer that somehow your life is not controlled by you. You're not responsible for anything, and that it's all randomly happening out there, and the best you can do is put on your helmet every day and hope for the best when you head out the door. Trust is actually in the present. It's remembering, right now, I am whole, I am perfect. If I am whole and I am perfect, there is nothing that can affect me. There is nothing that can hurt or harm me. And if there is nothing that can hurt or harm me, and we are talking here at the level of the mind, it means there is nothing that can hurt or harm anybody else in my life. They are wholly safe, secure, loved, looked after as well. So have a look at your language, and have a look at what you're hoping for, and have a look at how we can transfer that to trust. And look at what is that gap, because invariably that gap is the ego. So back to our learnings with Ricky. Well, she certainly taught us to trust. What's more, we learned that trust equals peace, and we learned that we wanted peace above all else. And this is a big thing for you to look at as well. You see, We mentioned before about how this life is like a bazaar, a market stall with all these trinkets. So long as you see value in that above the peace of God that we're talking about, so long you will experience suffering. Peace, love, abundance, and joy flow naturally. There's nothing that you have to do for it. They will flow naturally for you. First, you have to desire that more than anything else. You have to give up your desire in order to have it, strangely. When we give up seeking even spiritual seeking, when are we ready to become a finder? When are you ready to stop being a seeker? We learned to give up expectations. That was huge with Ricky and the example there. It wasn't that we said, okay, we love and accept you, but please don't take your life, or we can say this if you don't take your life. We had to give up all of that. And what we learned was that in our ultimate surrender is when we discover that we are entirely looked after. But first we have to surrender totally. Now, surrender doesn't mean give up. See, surrender means I hand over to Spirit, to the unified will, to that part of me which knows. It's an acknowledgement that I know nothing. And really, that's one of the most powerful things that you can say, is to say, I know nothing. What are you going to do about this situation? I don't know. And dare to sit there. Then we are allowing our higher self, our unified self, to speak to us and to advise us. We all learn by contrast, and I'm sure you too will learn by contrast. And don't judge yourself, and we will spend some more time on judgment. But you see, it's in the contrast you will discover for yourself the times when you hand over in trust, you will experience peace, and the very next day, the very next hour, you might do something where unconsciously you're again at the wheel, 2 hands on the chair of ego, and bang, you're going to experience pain, suffering, isolation. That's okay. Don't judge yourself. Just pick yourself up and choose again. And this is the critical point, you see, because what the ego would like to do is say, that's great, you've learned all this material now, and then it will keep score. Hey, guess what, Tomas? Today, it's only 3 o'clock, and you've screwed up 6 times already. You say, why don't you just give up? You can't get this. The truth of the matter is that you only have to ever choose once again. That's all. There is no judgment. You never made a mistake. You're not guilty of anything. All that's being asked of you is to choose love every time. Earlier in this session, Nouk mentioned the decision maker, and we referenced that even earlier than that in the program. Where you want to go with everything, every choice that you have in your life, before you act or react, take 3 deep breaths, go to the decision maker. Who is the observer? Who is the part of us that's non-judgmental? Just purely observing. In this space of the observer, there is no right and wrong. It purely watches. And then from that space where you are now detached from the emotion that you're facing, detached from the action that you're contemplating, detached from the reaction you're contemplating, from that place you have the vantage point of being above the battlefield. You can look down, and now you can make a choice again. Instead of the way that you've acted every other time through your conditioning, you have the choice to take a breath and ask yourself, if I act like that, is that out of love or fear? And invite the Holy Spirit, the universal inspiration, to come in and give you that answer. Don't answer that question yourself, because the ego is standing right next to you with its hand up going, I'll answer that. I know the answer, just give me one more chance. And it's always going to give you the wrong answer. So if we dare to just step back, invite the universal inspiration in before we do anything, and say, right, I want to choose again. And each time we begin choosing with love, what's going to happen is that our life will begin altering immeasurably. Immeasurably, because you will start developing for yourself trust, because you will see the effect of that trust. You will witness it for yourself, that you feel this deep peace that we are talking about here. And as you feel that deep peace that we're talking about in this program, you're going to start desiring that peace for yourself more than anything else in this life. And when you do, the doors, the gates to love, abundance, peace, your purpose, all of that will open up for you. And you will recognize you never had to chase it. You simply had to allow it to come to you. You discover that in fact, it's been waiting for you. And what's more, all of our chasing and seeking and desiring from the ego has actually moved it further away from us. Your love, joy, peace, and abundance is at the door. You only need to take one step in truth. That step of trust. That's it.